Joining us today on the show is returning guests, one of our favorite guests that we love having on the show from the Seahawks draftblog.com. Rob Staton joins us today, and it just couldn't work out better. Just the way things have gone this season, right? We are halfway through. Well, the old days, we'd be exactly halfway through, 8 games in, 4-4. So there's a lot to look at. Obviously, there's been some ups and downs, a lot more of a roller coaster ride maybe than some people thought there would be. And we're coming off a pretty bad loss. So there's a lot more questions than answers, I think, right now. So Rob's going to come on. He's going to help us, hopefully maybe try to answer some of those questions and just get into all of that, get into just the state of the team, the way the team's constructed, Mike MacDonald and this new regime. So it's going to be an awesome conversation with Rob. So before, guys, we get into all that, just a little bit of quick housekeeping. If you've been watching the channel, you like what you've been seeing, there's a few ways to support the channel. It's all in the description. But the easiest way, go down and sub to the channel and hit the like, hit the share button because it all helps out the channel. Or you could buy us a coffee. It's just another way to help us out. And like I said, guys, all the links are down there. So now that that's all out of the way, guys, on the other side, on the Hawk Zone, Rob Staton.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game. And it's right.
Get off me!
DK.
Yes, sir.
Hey, it's John Schneider with the Seattle Seahawks.
And Washington's got a lead. Leon Washington.
Jackson, Smith, and Jigba. The Seahawks are going to host the NFC Championship.
Every year, the NFL does.
Is it going to be another 9-8?
Mike MacDonald got to finish something.
They have to fix the offense.
Part of his success and part of
ambition of being the LOB
Want to hear? That's trading DK Metcalf.
Play him aggressive.
This is the Hawk Zone Rundown with Ryan and Bryce.
Guys, Rob Staton back on the show again. Rob, one of our favorite guests to have on the show. He has the draft blog that you guys all know about, SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Rob, we got you on at an interesting time here. We're halfway through the season, man. I mean, we're 4-4. The season is honestly flying by. I feel like we just kind of kicked this thing off, but we're halfway. And to us, when Bryce and I have talked the last few weeks, we have a lot more questions going on than answers, even than we had, say, a few weeks ago. And it's kind of concerning, to say the least. And you can talk about what's going on the field, but then there's all the other things, to upper management, to the new regime. So I'll throw it out there to you. What is the biggest concern for you at the moment? I know there's a lot of things going through your mind, but is it maybe a specific position group? Or is it the discipline preparation, that you've kind of seen out there? Like, there's been a lot of undisciplinary stuff that's been happening on the field, infighting, whatever you want to call it. Or maybe too much inexperience happening right now just in key coaching positions. What's maybe the biggest thing that's jumping out to you so far halfway through?
my biggest concern is that they've completely changed the coaching staff and the same issues are still there. So everything that was bad about the end of last season still remains. They haven't fixed the run defense. They haven't fixed the offensive line. They're no closer to having the identity that they say that they want. All of the issues that we were talking about a year ago are still there. Not a single thing has been solved. Unless you want to say that the root concepts are a little bit better on offense now, like because Shane Waldron's been replaced. Like, that's pretty much it. Like, there is nothing at all other than that feels like a net win so far. And I find that really disappointing. Like, I did not expect, I thought before the season began that the Seahawks could have a good year. I was really bullish about the Seahawks and thought they were going to have a really good season. But I also anticipated that there was a chance that, with a rookie head coach and a rookie offensive coordinator and a rookie defensive coordinator, that there will be some teething problems. They may lose more games than anticipated purely through inexperience. But as long as they were on a path that you thought, okay, I can see the direction of travel here, give it another off season, come back again next year, go again. Like, as long as they were kind of in that mindset, it wouldn't have bothered me and I wouldn't have been that pissed off about anything. But watching that at the weekend, watching a total utter humiliation by the Bills, watching 4 defeats out of 5, watching a team that just doesn't seem to have any of the stuff that it needs to be the kind of team that it says it wants to be, is a massive concern. And when you get into this place and you see the same issues year after year after year, you start to wonder, one, can the people in charge actually turn this thing around? 2, are they prepared to be honest about the state of the roster and actually do what is required to get it to the place where it needs to get to? Or is the team just destined to be in this eternal middle ground forever, which teams get into, like the Falcons, like the Seahawks are currently now, like the Saints have become, where you always think we'll just get them next time. We'll just have a good off season and we'll be there. And you're never there. The Seahawks have got a lot of work to do to become a contender. I don't personally have any interest in watching a team as a fan that just clings on to not being bad. And to be fair, they have been bad this year. So it's perhaps the wrong way of putting it. Not being terrible, maybe. Not being the Patriots this year. Not being the Panthers. I need to see the team progressing towards the possibility of being great in the near future. And when I watch this, they feel as far away today as they did in January.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you just said. I think too, when you look at it too, you mentioned that this team is not, terrible like the Pats or whoever else that's, the Panthers, the 1-win teams. Because you sort of, we looked at this roster and like you said, we were bullish too. Like we sort of said, okay, you know what? They have, DK, Tyler, JSN. You looked at the offense and the running game and okay, Witherspoon, time to be a leader, we'll talk about that leadership. But you sort of said, okay, you know what? There is talent on this team. And then with Mike being there and all the positives that were, the players were saying all the right things at the podium, and then training camp seemed really positive and kind of got people's expectations up again. So, how do you look at it? Is it more of a roster construction? And then, because we're 8 games in, I know we have a new regime, but like you said, this is the same problems we've had, and it hasn't got any better. If not, I mean, man, Sunday looked worse in a lot of ways. It's right up there with some of the bad ones. So is it more of let's really reconstruct this as far as a philosophy is concerned of how we construct a team? But as long as John Schneider is at the helm, what do you honestly think that like the reality is of that? Do you think John's going to sit there and be like, you know what? I've been here for 15 years. It's just time to completely change my philosophy. You know what? Like, I'm just going to blow this up and I'm going to focus on the O-line and I'm not going to tweak it here. And is it something that could even be a reality? Or do you think we're going to kind of continue on as just maybe tweaking, drafting, especially if we win 8 games or something this year? I mean, where do you sort of lean on that? Is it going to take maybe Schneider not here in the future to really sort of see this team completely differently, philosophy restructured?
Well, I think there's 2 conversations to have here on this. I think there's to part the Schneider thing for a minute, because let's just take him out of the equation. I think the problems the Seahawks have currently is they have, and I credit to Jeff Simmons, who really made me think about this when I spoke to him this week on one of the streams that I did. He made me think about how this roster has been built. And what I think they've done, looking from the outside, is they have decided they're going to be risk averse with character, which is fine. I've got no problem with that. And that they are going to be very much sticking to their draft board when they're picking players. Again, I have no problem with that. But what that has meant is that the picks that they have had in the drafts that they have been provided have not enabled them to build the kind of team that they necessarily want. I think if in an ideal world, John Schneider probably would have invested a lot of early picks in the offensive line and built the kind of offensive line we all want to see. But he wasn't in a position to do that. There wasn't an amazing offensive lineman available at 5th overall in the 2023 draft. So he took Devon Witherspoon. There wasn't an amazing offensive lineman available with a 20th pick. So he took Jackson Smith-Njigba. That's what the board told him to do. And I am never going to complain at a GM for taking best player available. But as it happens, they have ended up building a team which is fairly contradictory to the team they say they want, which is to be physical up front, dominant in the trenches, feature the running game. They can't do any of those things. And it's because their resource spend has often gone into areas of the team that don't create that kind of a team. Like they're spending an absolute fortune on 2 receivers this year. It's a massive amount of cap space spent on DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. They have invested money in the defensive line, which I think is admirable. And it's a problem that they still can't defend the run despite all of that massive investment. And that's, again, is perhaps another thing we need to talk about. But overall, they've created a finesse feeling roster, but with the vision and the identity to be anything but finesse. And that is why they suddenly end up like this. Now, how do they go about fixing that? To bring it on to John Schneider, the big question for me is John Schneider in a secure enough position? Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. To turn around to ownership and say, do you know what? I really need to start. I've made some mistakes, or we've not had these opportunities, and now I'm going to have to rework big chunks of this roster to create the kind of team we want to be. This has been a reality check for us this year, and I'm going to do that. Maybe he is in a position to do that. We will have to wait and see. We will have to wait until the next offseason to find out. If he feels as if there is a lot of pressure on him to deliver, having seen Pete Carroll fired, he might feel like he has no other choice but to run the course with this roster, to try and make this work so that he can turn to his bosses and go, see, it was okay. I just needed another offseason to fix these issues. So that's going to be the big question for me. What I think needs to happen, whether John Schneider is the GM or not, is an aggressive approach. And it needs to be pinned on a board somewhere at the VMAC. Aggressive approach to the offensive line. I have written a plus 3,000 word article this week discussing a plan for how they might be able to do that. Looking at the veteran options, looking at the options in the draft. I think you have to be prepared to go all in now on offensive line. You need to go and sign some veterans who are going to be available, and I've listed some of those names in that article, who are going to be available in the offseason. You have got to go and draft some players. You cannot do too much. If that means you are weaker at other areas on this roster to go and build up your offensive line, so be it. The days of being weak on the O-line and strong elsewhere have to be in the past. They have to prioritize the lines. They've got to do it. And until they fix those lines, you will not have the kind of team you say that you want. It's as simple as that.
So, Rob, actually, I was going to ask you a little bit about this John Schneider situation, kind of like what you were just talking about, because the hat you're wearing with the Mariners. I was having a conversation the other day with Dan Viens of Seahawks Forever, and we were kind of talking about the John Schneider effect and what's going on and how does this go moving forward, because there was the rumor that if Pete and him came back together, it didn't work. They were both out. So Pete kind of fell on the sword and John kept his job and Pete got ousted. I wonder if there's a sort of Jerry DePoto situation here, which we were kind of talking about, that's kind of selling your vision to upper management. And I wonder if there's part of this going, okay, part of my vision going forward for the Seahawks is I will try and make what we had constructed with Pete work, this roster that we currently have, because really it's a Pete Carroll, John Schneider roster that's been kind of carried over in a lot of senses. And if it doesn't, I can blow it up the next offseason and actually go and rebuild this whole thing. And I have that kind of security to do that, because his contract, I think, runs through the 2027 draft, I think is what John Schneider's contract runs through. So that's where I kind of wonder with this, because there's been a couple things Mike MacDonald said in his press conferences and his post game and even a show on 710, where it kind of feels like he's saying that we may have talent, but it's not the right talent. Like he said, it's not schematic this week on 710. Like the X's and O's aren't the problem and so on. And then he says the players are playing hard. I can see that. And it feels like he's mincing together in between there, like read between the lines. I don't have the right players. Not that these guys aren't talented, but I don't have the right players. Do you think that at all is potentially an outcome here for this?
I'd be shocked if he doesn't feel that way. I mean, we've all seen the games. There's absolutely no way that he will be thinking, I'd guess, that he's got the players. He said that, in fairness, he has also said that a few times. We've got all the guys we need in this locker room to get to where we need to go. I think that's probably coach talk. But they don't look like they have the players to either do what he wants to do defensively or to create the kind of team. And you don't appoint a Harbaugh protege to create anything other than a copy of what the Harbaughs do. And I don't know about you guys, when I've watched the Seahawks this year, even when they've played well against Atlanta and whatnot, I've never thought I'm watching a Harbaugh team here. Like they don't look like that. So unless they add the personnel to do that, then it won't happen. For John Schneider, listen, I think if the Seahawks were minded to part ways with John Schneider, one, they wouldn't give Mike MacDonald a 6-year contract. Two, I think they may have just cleaned house last year and gone with and maybe they would have gone after Harbaugh and let him run the show, or they've gone for a GM and let him pick the new coach. The idea that this this ownership, who are not football people, they're not the Jerry Joneses and people like that who've been around the game forever, would fire John Schneider and then set about appointing a new GM with a head coach who's only would have had at the end of the season 2 years of defensive coordinator experience and 1 year as a head coach. I just don't see that happening. I think they're tied to John Schneider, and I think that it's just going to be interesting to see what he decides to do, whether he doubles down on what they've already got or whether he's prepared to make changes. We probably also need to clarify what each of us would actually want to see as a change. How do you initiate this change? For me, it's just been really aggressive for the offensive line, but there are other things that need doing. I think you need to I think they should have got rid of some players this week. I think you need to send a message to this team. You've lost 4 out of 5. You've just been embarrassed at home. Why hasn't someone been cut? Why hasn't D. Williams been cut? Why haven't they said, Draymond Jones, we're going to trade you to the Panthers and eat your contract? That's how badly you've played. Why haven't they done something to shoot an arrow across and say, look, who's next? Do you want to be next? Do you want to be traded somewhere? Do you want to be cut? Jobs are on the line here. Get out there and do better. Make sure this is fixed. So that's the kind of thing I want to see. And I also want to see the players who are underperforming on big contracts go. And I want to see a massive, aggressive resource spend in the offensive line. And if that massive, aggressive resource spend doesn't work, at least we won't be sat here thinking what we've been thinking for years, that the O-line has let them down. Like, make yourself great in the trenches, and then there are going to have to be other things they're going to have to do. They're going to have to draft a quarterback sooner rather than later. They're going to have to probably find another difference maker on defense. You may even say they need a difference maker on defense. Like, who's wrecking any games at the minute? Nobody. Like, they've got players who, Boy Maffey will get you a sack. Derek Hall will get you a sack. Then Williams will get you a sack. They're not wrecking games. So they don't have anybody like that either. I think the 3 ingredients you need are a good O-line, a game wrecker, and a quarterback. For the long term, I don't think they have any of those things right now. So they've got to be honest about that. How honest are they prepared to be? Sadly, we've got to wait until March to find out.
Yeah, Rob, do you think it could be like, obviously it's a bit of a combo, right? We talk about the personnel, but you listen to even a lot of the Seattle media, even a few weeks ago, they had, those guys are on every day and they got to talk about stuff and fill it, but they're talking about what guys would you throw at massive contracts to, and there started to become a list. I don't know about DK because you got to do Charles Cross, and then also what about Maffei when he comes up, and the Wolin, right? And now you look at games like we just had, but that kind of shows you how bullish a lot of people were with this roster. Let Mike MacDonald get their hands on Wolin or Witherspoon will even take his next leap. And you've seen a couple of guys, Wolin's looking good in coverage, but I mean, nobody played good on Sunday. But, Witherspoon, for example, just missing tackles. Is it a comp? Like, are you surprised, kind of moving over to say Mike MacDonald? We're halfway through the year, and like you mentioned, he was a defensive coordinator under the Harbaughs, only 2 years there, youngest head coach in the league, right? And everybody thinks, well, we got our guy, and maybe, but also maybe not. And that's why you sit here and have guys like yourself on, and we we sort of question and look at all angles. Did you think you'd get a little more at this point from certain guys like a Witherspoon? To us, we thought, well, maybe it's a sophomore slump because what's going on there? And just like fundamental tackling and all this kind of stuff, undisciplined play, a lot of undisciplined play that you've seen on the field in all facets. You mentioned D. Williams. Like Bryce and I, after week 1, we were like, this guy should be cut. Like, it was just from decision making to mental errors to dropping. It's not even the drop in the punts. It's more the mental. Where's your head at? Like the preparation. So yeah, after 8, like what's your overall, I guess, thoughts of Mike and how he's done with the guys he's had on the field? Did you expect a little more?
Well, just to go back to your first bit before I talk about Mike MacDonald and whether I expected more, people got carried away. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After like 3 games, on the radio, they were talking about top 5 players who are most urgent to sign. They were talking about, got to get Charles Cross signed. He's legit. He's the main man. I mean, he hasn't played like that since the Denver game. He looks pretty. I think he looks okay. And and sadly, that's after 3 years, he is an okay offensive tackle. They probably will have to re-sign him because the alternative is a big black hole at left tackle. But just steady on. Like, you've played 3 games. You've played the Broncos, the terrible Patriots, and the Miami Dolphins without Tua. Let's get in the ice bath for a minute here. Oh, you've got to pay this guy. You've got to pay that guy. People got way carried away. To me, that kind of talk is equal to saying that all the coaches should be fired today. Like, it's as premature as that. So I don't understand why that conversation happened. It made me cringe a little bit that it was happening after 3 games. Like, no, let's play a few more games. And now they've lost 4 out of 5. So who deserves to be paid right now? Freaking nobody deserves to be extended right now. They need to go out there and prove it. Did I expect more? Yes. I expected a lot more. I expected Devin Witherspoon to be a creative, violent force in this defense. I thought they were going to move him all around the field. I thought he might be a physically different, but almost playing a similar role to Kyle Hamilton. Maybe that he would be like a weapon within this defense. He's been rubbish. Like, he's not been impressive at all. Like, it's really disappointing. He doesn't seem to be doing anything, and he's a 5th. With Tariq Woolen, when Tariq Woolen has a bad game, he's a 5th round pick. It's easier to chalk it down to, well, maybe he's not as good as we thought after 3 games. Maybe he's always going to be a bit streaky. He's got the athleticism to be great, but then he's going to have a bad game. He's a 5th round pick. Devin Witherspoon's the 5th overall pick. Like, you need more than this from him. Draymond Jones, massive disappointment because they reworked his contract before the season began, and you're thinking, wow, they must be seeing something with this guy. Why have they just made it harder to get rid of him? They must be thinking he's going to be like a major X factor for them, and they paid so much from a year ago. Maybe Mike MacDonald's going to get something out of him that Pete Carroll couldn't. It's been crap. Like, the whole of the defensive line has been massively underwhelming, really. I appreciate Maffei and Hall have been a bright spot, but they're not game wreckers. The linebackers were massively disappointing. Rayshawn Jenkins had a good start, then became disappointing. The tackling's been awful, disappointing. They don't play with the fire and intensity we saw against Denver. That's disappointing. Offensively, they're as streaky as they were last year. They can go a couple of quarters where they can't do anything. Then they'll have a quarter where they look fantastic. They still can't run the ball, still can't defend the run. The whole thing has been a big letdown. I think Mike MacDonald, and this is not hindsight, I voiced these concerns, got absolutely hammered by a bunch of fans for it, by the way. I wrote an article saying, can we just slow down on Mike MacDonald? All of the defensive Sean McVay talk before he was appointed, because I pointed out in an article that they still gave up a whole bunch of running yards against the Rams and the Niners. They had 400 plus yards from both of those teams against the Ravens last year. The Rams had a very good game against Baltimore in Baltimore, which is concerning given the next opponents. And here's the thing. The Ravens played with a deficit in the game. They were behind in the game for 88 total snaps last season. That's unheard of. The offense was so good, led by Lamar Jackson at MVP. The defense always played with a lead. And we saw what playing with the lead looks like with Mike MacDonald in charge against Atlanta in the second half. Atlanta gave up on the run. They put the ball in Kirk Cousins' hands. You got after him. Turnovers. It looked like Baltimore's defense last year. What's happened when the Seahawks haven't got a lead? The defense looks like it looks abysmal. It looks like one of the worst in the NFL, if not the worst. So you start to wonder a little bit here. Hang on. Can this only work if Lamar Jackson's throwing for however many yards and running for however many, and they're putting 40 points up a game? Like, is that the only way that Mike MacDonald's system works? Because that's kind of how it's looking right now. And that's really worrying. It's not, people go, I'll give it time. No, that is starting to make me wonder a little bit. Because if you are reliant on the offense, and the Seahawks are reliant on Geno Smith right now, they rely on Geno Smith. The Seahawks will have a chance of winning if Geno Smith plays really, really well. And if he doesn't, they kind of look like they're going to lose every game. So if that's what it is, why have you got a defensive-minded head coach? You might as well have an offensive-led team that's going to make the offense consistent. You just get the next fired defensive-minded head coach to try and relaunch his career as your defensive coordinator. And then you just roll with that. Because you can fire that guy then if it doesn't work out. Like, this is why I wanted an offensive-minded head coach. So that's not revisionist history. That's what I was saying. But look, we have got Mike MacDonald. There's no changing that now. He isn't going to be fired. No, I don't think. So you have to move forward. There is a massive amount of inexperience. The biggest problem, guys, is that none of these coaches work together anymore. Mike MacDonald has been a defensive coordinator for 2 years. He doesn't have a contacts book. He's not been networking for years. I bet if you said to anybody last summer, like summer 2023, do you know who Mike MacDonald is? Is he the lead singer from that band? Who is he? Do you mean the Dolphins head coach? Like, that's what they would say. No one knew who he was. And then as the Ravens had a great season, he was suddenly being talked about as a head coach. So he might not have even been networking and setting up plans to be a head coach. He might have just been coaching the Ravens defense. And all of a sudden he was like, I could be a head coach. And then he's got to suddenly, like, on the fly, think about who his staff's going to be. So when they were going out and building the staff, they're bringing in a coach from here, a coach from here, a coach from here. He hasn't worked with anybody before. All of the people that are coaching his defense haven't been working within his defense. They're all learning it as much as the players are. Offensively, he's just been paired with a guy who never even coached in the NFL before. So it's not connected. So I think possibly the only way to fix this is to get more coaches who understand Mike MacDonald's defense. That's why this week I've been saying, I won't be surprised if they go after Wink Martindale in the offseason. He's at Michigan. He's Mike MacDonald's mentor. He knows the scheme. He's a proven defensive coordinator. Maybe you bring him in. But is he going to want to be Mike MacDonald's right-hand man? Or is he going to want to go to a gig where he can run the defense for himself? But if you don't bring guys like that in who are experienced, who understand the system, who can help coach the players and take some of the stress off Mike MacDonald, is this ever going to fix itself? And can you essentially run the offense that Ryan Grubb is running, which seems very collegey to me?
Yeah.
Can you run that in the NFL? That's a massive question mark as well.
So that was one thing I was actually going to bring up to you here, Rob, about the Seahawks coaching staff and if they really missed on their hiring, which you kind of alluded to in this in some regards. The one thing I've gone back and watched almost every game now of the Hawks and all 22, especially their offensive side, because I am an offensive coordinator, so I like to dive into that side. What drives me nuts with the Seahawks offense right now, and I liked what Grubb did at the University of Washington, but you were playing with the top offensive line in college football. So you could be in shotgun and drop back and do things because you had the best offensive line in college football by most metrics. We don't have that. That was a complete misjudgment, I think, in some regards, because with Grubb, I think he's a very, very smart coach and has great schemes for getting guys open. But we are so shotgun dependent on offense, run game, pass game, screen game, everything, that teams basically know what we're going to do before we do it, because our run game has no development. And for me, when I've coached offense, if my offensive line is struggling, I am not doing a shotgun run game. I am taking the ball from under center, turning around, and we are handing it off and giving my back the most amount of momentum going forward in a direction. And like you look at Ken Walker, most of the time he's getting tackled 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage because we have no push. Like the Buffalo game this week, we had no push. Our line was being stood up. Doesn't matter if we double teamed, whatever we did. And so when I look at two offensive coordinators right now that I'm really intrigued with what they're doing, Ben Johnson being one with Detroit, and you look at what he's doing with Jared Goff, the mixing and the matching. They drafted Jahmyr Gibbs. They've got David Montgomery, 2 very solid running backs. Their best offensive receiving weapons is St. Brown, who's a slot. By all metrics, he's a slot receiver, and Laporta. They don't have any DK, Tyler Lockett on the outside, but because of the way they run their offense and the mixing of formations and those type of things, and yes, I get they have the top offensive line probably in football, but the way Ben Johnson calls a game, he mixes everything. It's very different. It's all over the place, and the defense can't kind of peg point what they're going to do. The other offensive coordinator I've been really impressed with is Arthur Smith with the Steelers. He's brought Najee Harris back to life somehow, and somehow he's made Russell serviceable. Right? We all wrote off Russell Wilson, and he's now turned around, and everyone, I remember when there was talk of Arthur Smith potentially being our offensive coordinator, and everyone was like, God, no, like he couldn't get Kyle Pitts to work. I don't think any people really thought of the fact that Kyle Pitts might have just not been a very good tight end. And maybe that was the issue, because Arthur Smith seems to be doing quite well in Pittsburgh with either Justin Fields or Russell Wilson at quarterback. He's got one real outside weapon in George Pickens, but somehow he's taken an offensive line that's very young and developed that run game. And Najee Harris, again, over 100 yards rushing. Like, we couldn't do that versus the Giants. So I don't know if Ryan Grubb, if this doesn't get any better offensively, I don't know how he stays another year.
So I've got a lot of thoughts here. I mean, first of all, the talk was that Arthur Smith was Mike MacDonald's guy, that they were a package duo. And the reason that Arthur Smith is now not the Seahawks offensive coordinator is simply because Baltimore got to the AFC Championship, time was going on, jobs running out, if you realize, Chicago moved very quickly for Waldron. Cliff King, wasn't Cliff Kingsbury, was it? It was somebody else. There was somebody else who got, I think Cliff Kingsbury agreed to take over the Raiders. There was somebody else who, because then he reneged on that. There was another job that he ended up there because Cliff Kingsbury went off. But there was a couple of other jobs that I think got snapped up quite quickly. And I think Arthur Smith was a bit worried. If Mike MacDonald doesn't get this job in Seattle, I'm not going to have a gig. And the Steelers' job was there, and he took it. So if it wasn't for that, then he may well be the Seahawks offensive coordinator right now. And I agree with everything you've said. I think he was hammered in Atlanta for the lack of Bijan Robinson carries from a fantasy football perspective, and for not getting Kyle Pitts involved. And we're a year on, and I kind of think he's been validated completely. And I think he's making Russell Wilson look fantastic, for that offense. They just need a guy who can do what Russ is doing right now. So I think I wouldn't be surprised to me if Arthur Smith is a head coach in 2 years again and gets another chance. So I think that's a big missed opportunity really for Seattle. What I would say about Seattle's offense is I am not a scheme guru. I'm not an X's and O's guy. It's not my thing. I think they are using the shotgun because they think they can't do anything else. I think they're doing that because they don't trust the offensive line under center. I think they're doing it because they want to give Geno a chance of actually getting the ball out. And I think the sacrifice to that is they're having to run a lot from shotgun because they have to be in shotgun to throw the ball. And I think it's the O-line's fault. Now, if you gave Ryan Grubb a top offensive line, he might actually end up looking like a top offensive coordinator. Because I do agree with you, the way that he schemes things open on the offense. I'm not a fan of the no huddle, look at the sideline. It feels like I'm watching a Pac-12 game. But I'm intrigued by the idea of the tempo varieties. So I'm not going to give up on Ryan Grubb just yet. But it comes down to the O-line again. The Lions can do everything that they want to do because they can rely on 5 or 6 guys in front of the quarterback to do their jobs. And the Seahawks have got 5 guys who I wouldn't trust to cut my lawn. So that's the difference between the two teams.
Yeah. So do you think it was like a case where, John, we let Damian Lewis go because, the market for guards, it's high for John, right? So you let him walk, and then you're like, well, we'll just fill in with this guy who's been terrible, and Laken Tomlinson, will put him there. And then you sign a last minute center because Olu they figured, well, it's not going to cut it. So let's bring in this guy coming off an ACL. And if it works out, there was just so many, like, if this works out perfectly, then we'll have maybe a decent line. Like Connor has to be just in top form. Abe's got to be back. So a couple things, like, was it more of a hope that this line would just be decent? Because when you look at it, like you mentioned, the things they want to do and the things that they're not doing, they're lining up in shotgun consistently. Ken Walker with 12 rushing yards without, with a guy that should have been, obviously trying to get him involved on Sunday with no DK Metcalf, more than normal. I mean, Ken goes, that offense usually goes okay. But there's been a few games where he's just not putting up any numbers in the rushing game. So, I mean, I hate harping on the offensive line because we sort of knew it wasn't going to be great, but it is looking really bad and just hindering what we can do offensively. So do you think that John might have just made himself believe that they were going to be better than it was, or do you just think it was a complete afterthought again and saying, well, I'll just fill in the gaps and maybe Abe will get healthy and things will click?
No, I think it's a bit of a woe is me kind of thing going on here. The problem is that we've heard that for too long. Right. So I think that they perhaps didn't anticipate that the guard market would explode. If you remember a couple of years ago, Christian Kirk got an obscene salary, and all of a sudden the wide receiver market exploded, and it's still going. And that happened with the interior offensive line this year. So Robert Hunt signed a contract worth $20 million a year. And the minute that happens, everybody else gets paid more. So I don't think, I imagine they were aware that was going to happen at Combine when all these things get worked out and markets get established. So they had a call to make off the back of the Combine. Do we want to get involved in this? Do we think Robert Hunt is worth $21 million a year? Do you want to pay Damian Lewis a massive contract? I didn't want to do that.
No. So
I think they ended up in a situation where you have to pivot from that. The market's gone away from us. There's nothing we can do. So, okay, that's a situation. But you can't just shrug your shoulders then. And that there has to be a proper plan B. And this is the problem I have with the Seahawks sometimes. They don't seem to have a plan B. They don't seem to have a way around this. Like when they had there was an off season a few years ago where Joe Tooney, Corey Linsley, and another Kevin Zeitler were free agents. And the Seahawks didn't get any of them. So they end up having to trade for Gabe Jackson. And then they have to move Damian Lewis to left guard to fit Gabe Jackson at right guard because he won't go back to playing left guard. It's like, that wasn't a good plan B. Like, people praised it at the time. It didn't feel like go and get Joe Tooney. He's on $16 million a year. You gave Jamal Adams 17 and a half. Go and give him the money to get him to Seattle. Make Kansas City go, we can't go that far. And then you say to him, get over here and play for us. Like, it happens all the time where teams who don't have Mahomes and aren't the Chiefs go and land a great free agent. It happens. Like the Jags signed Brandon Scherf. You can make it happen, okay? You can go and sign these players. So they didn't have a plan B when the market went away from them. Then in the draft, we hear all this talk after the draft that they quite like J.C. Latham. They were prepared to draft J.C. Latham. I suspect if they'd have drafted J.C. Latham, they would not have started him at right tackle necessarily. They would have played him at guard because I think at the time they'd signed George Fant. That indicated they weren't planning on playing someone like Latham at guard if they drafted him, at tackle if they drafted him. They were going to put him inside to guard. But J.C. Latham ends up going, 7th overall to the Titans instead. So you just draft Christian Haynes in round 3. I didn't have a problem with the pick, but you see what I mean? Like, it's always like the plan B never freaking works. So, like, come up with a better plan A. Like, be more aggressive. Be prepared to spend money on somebody to solve a problem. Be prepared to maybe be aggressive in the draft if the player that you don't want's not going to be there. Like, I never understand why this team is aggressive for trading like 2 first-round picks and a third for Jamal Adams and then giving him a contract for that loser. And trading for Jimmy Graham and trading like for Sheldon Richardson and renting renting Leonard Williams for a second-round pick, renting Ernest Jones for a fourth-round pick this year, but they'll never do anything to go and be really aggressive on the offensive line. Like that's what I want to see them do, and that's why I wrote the article I wrote this week talking about the offensive line. I want to see veterans signed in the offseason, even if it costs you more than you're comfortable with. Go and get them. If that means being bad at other positions, so be it. You've been bad enough at offensive line for so long, it hasn't worked. Be good at the offensive line and make do at other positions for a change, if you have to. And then go and draft some offensive line behind them. Do what the Eagles did. Have your veteran starters, have players you're developing in the background to replace them in the future. That is a plan. I need to see a plan like that as a Seahawks fan. I think we all do.
So, Rob, it's really funny, your rant just now on the offensive line, which was awesome, because the Vikings did exactly what you're saying about being aggressive and solving an issue. They just went and acquired Cam Robinson from the Jaguars to solve their left tackle problem. So there's a team identified, we lost our left tackle. We're not just going to muddle the rest of the year. Let's go get and solve a problem by getting another good left tackle, and then we'll deal with the problem after the season.
Yeah, well, the thing is with this is, sorry to go off on a tangent, I'm going to be interested to see what the compensation is for Cam Robinson, because I don't know about you guys. I'm sat here and I see Seahawks will trade for Ernest Jones. And I'm thinking, okay, cool, fine. Fine. I have no problem with that. Interesting. Let's see what the draft pick compensation is. It's a 4th-round pick, 2025 draft. And I'm like, wasn't he just traded for like a ham sandwich a few weeks ago? And he was. He was traded for a swap of picks in 2026, not next year. And then I see Johnson, the receiver, getting traded to Baltimore for peanuts. I see Uche, the pass rusher, being traded to Kansas City for it's not there's no ham in the sandwich. It's just a slice of bread that they've received in compensation. There was another trade last week, again, for peanuts for a player of some note. And I just sit there and think, why does it cost the Seahawks a 4th-round pick to acquire this guy? So let's see what the Cam Robinson deal is. Because if the Cam Robinson pick is something like a 2026 5th rounder or something, it's going to annoy me. And people go, the salaries and stuff like this. And I found it really frustrating that.
So I might be able to shed some light, Rob, on why. Apparently, I don't know if you saw, John Schneider was talking about the trade on his pre-game show. And apparently, this is what at least the rumors I've heard is, the reason they gave the 4th was to get the Titans to eat the contract.
That's my response to that is,
oh, I know. It's a bad move. I know.
The thing is that I've had a look at this. They're eating the contract. They're not eating. I think the Seahawks are saving like $1 million or something.
Yep.
Like Curtis was saying that. Like if they were saving $10 million, it makes sense. The Seahawks paid Jerome Baker a $4 million signing bonus to come to Seattle. That's gone. They've paid him for 7 games. So they have paid Jerome Baker a lot of money to do the square root of FA. Okay. And now he's gone away, and we're supposed to think, well, it's what a relief. They've taken the rest of his guaranteed salary on. Duh. They've traded for him. Like, how does that? I'm sorry. Whatever is left of Jerome Baker's fairly modest contract for the last 10 games is not worth a swap of picks in to 2026 draft at the arse end of that draft to go up to a 4th rounder in the next draft. That is BS. No one can convince me that that is fair. They were desperate. They rang the Titans. The Titans said, you can have him, but it's costing you a 4th. And they've just done it. That's why this has happened. And now, do you know what the worst thing about this is? And I hope he has a great time in Seattle. They're handcuffed to sign him now. Like, they are going to have to sign this guy back, possibly at expense. And every single cent that they pay on keeping this guy to justify this trade is going to come away out of the offensive line kitty. So where's your savings going to be, guys? Where are you going to make a saving elsewhere? You're going to cut Geno Smith? Trade Geno Smith? You're going to trade DK Metcalf? You're going to hope that Tyler Lockett retires? What are you going to do? You've got to find some money from somewhere if you're going to pay Ernest Jones. And they have to pay him now to justify the trade. Same with Leonard Williams a year ago. It's poor.
Yeah, I mean, Rob. So I mean, we ran down the list of a lot of these guys, Jamal Adams, and just a lot of the inconsistencies. Really, that when you see some of these moves John makes, like what is the plan overall? So with that said, when you look at it and you look at his history of making moves, making trades, maybe just evaluating, guys coming in here, the team he wants to build, and then he's hiring Mike MacDonald, and again, to me, he's unproven, right? Time will tell if Mike becomes a successful head coach here. But with all the moves and all the criticisms that he's had over these seasons, with some of these, giving up a lot for Jamal, and then turning around, like you said, signing him to a massive contract. And then we're just supposed to have faith that he got the right guy. So swinging it back to Mike, when you look at it and the way this season goes, if we're sitting here out of the playoffs and hovering anywhere between say 7-8 wins, but the play is just atrocious, just sort of similar. I mean, we got a tough stretch coming up, man. We got the Rams who are getting healthy, looking good. Then we go to Santa Clara. It doesn't really get easy for us. So if we, I mean, it looks like it just doesn't look good. So if we end the year sort of similar to how we're playing, no real improvements, the fans are looking at us like, what was the season about? How do you see Mike sort of, getting these guys to a level of buying in and coming into next season with just, kind of this, we're just going to run it back mentality? Does something have to change? Like, we think Mike's job's safe for at least 2 seasons. Like, if it continues like this, he's here for, no matter what happens, he's here for a couple. I don't know what your thoughts are, but do you see it sort of, that's where Mike's going to be really tested, as that leader to say, listen, we just had a horrible year. Things are going to change. I mean, how do you really kind of get in that locker room and say, things will be better, even though nothing, and maybe things will change, but the way it's trending, if we just trend the way we've been playing, I mean, how do you see all that shaping out? And do you think he'll be safe no matter what for 2 years, or do you see it longer than that?
I don't know. I mean, look, you have to kind of judge those situations when they arrive, don't you? Like,
Yeah.
I have no idea how long the rope is for a guy who's on a 6-year contract. I thought, I don't like to ever say anything like he's safe or make any kind of like assurances
Right.
definitively. I mean, I don't think he's going to get fired in the next 2 weeks. I don't think
No.
he'll be fired this year. But I think there was too many people when, I don't know if you guys, I honestly, I don't know how old you are. So I don't know if you were sort of fully fledged, passionate Seahawks fans in 2009.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, I want Jim Mora fired about halfway through that season. Like,
Right.
it was going absolutely nowhere, you could tell. And yet every radio show I listened to, every article I read, anytime the subject was broached that Mora should be fired, the media response was, that's not going to happen. They're not going to fire the guy after 1 season. And they did. So I don't think there's any point. Like, look at it. Like last year, they're not gonna fire Pete Carroll. They're not. I mean, how many guys in the local media were? They're not gonna fire Pete Carroll. Don't be silly. Like, it's a stupid conversation. Oh, they fired him. Like that. So there's no point ever sort of like trying to second guess what a team will do. I think it's best just left to the time and a place when you can have let's say if in 2 years they win like 3 games next year, I think we'll be all having a conversation about whether he should be fired. Yeah. What you need to see gradual improvement. In 2010, the Seahawks were awful, but they fluked the division at 7-9, and that would not have been enough to create buy-in. But winning the New Orleans game was, especially with Beastquake. So you throw it forward to the next year. They start off appallingly. They look terrible. But by the end of the year, they look like the toughest, most physical team in the NFL, led by Marshawn Lynch. The one thing they didn't have was a quarterback. So I imagine the team at that point was energized. It was not sort of thinking we're 7-9, we've not qualified for the playoffs. They're thinking, go and get a quarterback. Great respect to the late Tavares Jackson. Go and get a quarterback and game on. And they did. They got 2. They went and Matt Flynn and then Russell Wilson, and then Russ got the job. And the rest is history. So what you need to see is gradual improvement. If they're finishing the season with an absolute wet fart, then no one's going to be thinking, oh, great, let's go. And if that's the same next year, it'll be the same. Questions will be asked, which is why I think there needs to be an aggressive offseason coming around the corner. I don't think they've had one of those in a while. I think they need one. And I think it may be about some coaching adjustments. It might be about getting rid of some players who are underperforming and have been disappointing and just sort of eating that and being bold and embracing that there's certain players that have been disappointing. I think there's a lot of things that could be forthcoming for this team, but they've more than anything, you've got to see green shoots. It can't just be one game in Atlanta. This is the thing. Like, I could not believe how people immediately forgot the 3-game losing streaks to win in Atlanta. Like, people were talking about Ernest Jones trades. They're going for the division. It's there for the taking. The Niners are no good. The Cardinals are no good. Rams are done. Go and get it. This is amazing. And then, they've won 1 game in 4. And now they get blown out by the Bills, and everyone's kind of like, well, it's bad again. So
yeah.
I think we just need to see gradual improvement to get buy-in. I still have a lot of faith. I think Mike MacDonald's got the right kind of personality to be a good head coach. But I think right now he is struggling a little bit and doesn't know what to do. I don't think his coaches are supporting him to know what to do. And I think that's why we're seeing what we're seeing.
So I got a question for Rob. Players that you keep going forward. So how many players on the current roster are potential foundation type players if a major roster overhaul does occur this offseason? Who are they? And then the second part, because I know you're really tied in with the draft, Rob, who is one player in the 2025 draft class who you think could make an immediate impact and help this team go in the right direction?
Foundational players. I mean, I classify foundational players as players who you would say would be in the competition or a trajectory to be top 5 at their position in the NFL. So I think at the minute, the only player who could be that is Ken Walker. But I do not see Ken Walker as a foundational player because I think there's very few running backs who are. I think Marshawn Lynch was one of them. But as much as I love Ken Walker's play, I would not necessarily classify him as a foundational player. So I don't think they have any right now. I don't think there's anybody that bang the table for that. You must keep this guy. This is the identity of the team. No, there's nobody like. There's no Nick Bosa on this team. There's no Fred Warner on this team. There's no Trent Williams on this team. There's no Matt Stafford on this team. They're just they just don't seem to have that many of them at the minute. And people could go, DK's the guy, or Ken Walker, Charles Cross. I'm just thinking, yeah, but they're not consistent enough for me to sort of think that's the future. So I think there's a lot of question marks out there. There are a lot of question marks that haven't been answered this season, and I was hoping they would be for some of the. I wanted Charles Cross to become an elite left tackle. I wanted DK Metcalf to be more consistent and dominant. I wanted Devin Witherspoon to become a dude in the NFL and like a top 5-10 cornerback, and it's not happening. I wanted to see him go on the Derek Stingley trajectory, but it's not happened. So that's that bit. I mean, I'm sorry that's a negative answer. And look, people, I'm sure we'll get criticized, because you do anytime you say anything that's not overly positive. I mean, everyone no one ever takes any interest when you say anything positive, but the minute you start diagnosing where the team is after an absolute spanking by the Bills, it's you missed the negative. Who is somebody in the draft who could have immediate impact? I think it depends where they draft. If they end up in the top 10, I think Jalen Walker, Abdul Carter will be very, very good on the defense. I think Will Johnson is destined to be a very, 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 very good corner. Mason Graham is an unbelievable defensive tackle, although they've already drafted quarterbacks and defensive tackles early. So whether you want to go down that route again, I think if they pick in the middle of the first round, I think Tyler Booker would be an immediate starter at left guard. I like everything about him. It's hard to project greatness at left guard. I always feel like when you watch a guard, and maybe this is part of John Schneider's problem, you can project good. It's hard to project great at guard for the NFL. It takes a very the DNA, your mental makeup, your dedication to it, your sort of willingness to fight through the pain. it's hard to project who's going to be great. I think Tyler Booker can be a very, very good early starter at left guard. And then, if they're picking early enough, I think Kelvin Banks I think he's a left guard in the NFL. I think he could kick inside. I think, they are a couple of players who could come in and have an early impact for you.
Yeah. Rob, you just mentioned 3 Niners, like as far as like, Fred Warner and Bosa and guys like that. And you just know when that team's coming in, you're worried. You want to know where Warner is at all times. Just like when we had Cam, like you want to know at all times, or other teams want to know where is that guy on the field. And I agree. Listen, I'm a big DK guy, but I agree with you on the point that, how, talk about leaders or the guys that just can rally and just, get the guys together. I think he's a really good receiver. Is he a leader? That doesn't appear to be part of his DNA. And I agree too. You look at guys that you're thinking, who's that great guy for us? And like you said, it was talked about earlier, because Charles Cross could step up because, it's his next year and it's a big year for him. And Devin Witherspoon seemed like he has the DNA makeup of just that dog who plays bigger than he is. And we're just, it feels like, and I'm not saying we're missing on Devin Witherspoon. He's been very disappointing this year. Maybe it's a sophomore slump, but then it feels like we're always using those words. Like maybe it's this, maybe he's, this is the reason for not having those huge impact guys since, guys that from the Legion of Boom have left this building. So yeah, that makes it extremely tough when you're really trying to look for that guy, and then how do you go about it? But so how do you? I agree with your earlier point that to me, it's not a win total when I look at how Mike's ending the year. It's what's gradually getting better. I'd actually rather see them now at this point. And I want to get your take on what you think it's going to take. But because I feel like if we do squeeze out a couple late wins, and we're 8 wins, 9 wins, realistically, again, you talk about aggressive off season. Reality wise, if they do win 8, 9, they're fighting for the division. How realistic do you think, like in your opinion, will John get, or will he sort of turn the other shoulder again and say, hey, we're just a few pieces, Mike's second year, this staff, and they try to kind of keep doing the same thing? Reality wise, is it going to take them only winning 1 more game and maybe they 2 more to be like, hey, wait a second, like ownership's like, we really need to get aggressive here?
Well, that's my biggest fear. My biggest fear is that they win the last couple of games and it creates a false dawn. There will be an army of people on Seahawks Twitter very, very willing to grab that baton and run with it, that just run it back, because they always do. And this is look, they can have their opinions and they can be fans however they want. But there is an army of Seahawks fans who will take the most convenient path forwards. And if that is win a couple of games and everything's great, you'll see the same people doing their podcasts and things saying, give Geno Smith a $50 million a year contract immediately. You'll see people saying it's great, just drafting a left guard and everything will be fixed. Everything's fine. It just needs time and stuff like this. I think I just think that will be the worst thing. People have accused me of being a fan of tanking because I've said that the best thing for them might be to avoid a false dawn at the end of the season to really initiate the change that they want. I don't want the Seahawks to tank. I don't want them. Listen, there's nobody in this draft that I'm like really pining for. There's no like elite franchise quarterback I hope they get into position for. There's no amazing offensive lineman who's going to change the game forever. There's no reason to hope for that. It's purely and simply to avoid any delusions as to what this team is and to avoid making the changes that are necessary. That's what I'm desperate to avoid. And I do worry a little bit. We saw it last year that people were still give Pete another year and stuff like this because they beat, I don't know, the Titans late on and stuff like that, and the Cardinals in the last game, and they had a winning season, and Geno he had a good finish. So then he's, I don't know, the answer again. I just think that you've got to be honest about where this team is. You've really got to be honest. And they've got to do a better job. They've got to construct it the way that we've been talking about with the offensive line. And look, they've also got to find those guys. They've stopped finding them. Like people act like whenever you say they don't have anyone like Nick Bosa, people would go, well, you need the second overall pick for Nick Bosa. And I always say Chris Jones, second round, Dexter Lawrence, 17th overall, Max Crosby, 4th round pick. Who are the other guys that I like to bring up? TJ Watt, end of the 1st round. Could have had him. Some of us said they should draft him. Didn't draft him. Took Malik McDowell instead. You can run through all of the Troy Hendrickson later. There's plenty of game-wrecking pass rushers out there who did not cost a top 5 pick. There are plenty of other players at other positions. Fred Warner was a 3rd-round pick. Trent Williams was a trade for a 3rd-round pick. Like there are players out there that you can get without having to go over the top and need a really good pick. The Seahawks don't seem to find those guys anymore. They don't. All of their best players are drafted like in the first 2 rounds. They're acquired at great expense, like Leonard Williams. They don't seem to be like Reek Woolen is probably the closest they've had to somebody like that. And I don't know what to make of him. Like he looked like the best corner in the league for 3 games. And then on Sunday, he looked like he'd turned back into the 2023 version. He was soft and crap. So
Pittsburgh game.
It was the Pittsburgh game again. So it's, I just, can you please just build an offensive line? So
Is it
about that?
Is it scouting? Has John lost his magic? Like, because you had the Shermans back in the day. You got a lot of these guys weren't 1st-round picks, and like you said, now we're missing, and you get the first. You got to go 1st round, 2nd round, or you forget about the rest of the draft. So is it? And that's my only concern. I think Bright that we've talked about. Like, is John the guy now? Because if you looked at the recent history for a long time, to make these moves that need to be made, and he will be here right now, but if it doesn't happen, you roll it back. Like, does that leash start becoming a little shorter with ownership in him, or is it yeah, I mean, he's up, what Bryce said, 2027. You maybe let that play out and then go from there. That's only I guess 2-3 more years, but
I think there's a whole bunch of things you could say. Like I think it is still possible to win while being in the position the Seahawks were in. And I think the Broncos are a good example of that. They're 5-3.
Yeah.
They're basically playing with a quarterback who can't throw. And they're 5-3. They don't have any great defensive players. Like I thought Sean Payton was done. And he's managed to do a very good job so far of turning the Broncos into a team that are horrible to watch, but tough to play against. The Steelers have, they've got a good defense. They've found some answers there. They're 6-2, like they're top of the AFC North. You look at teams, how they've gone from being really bad to really good. The Texans, very aggressive to go and get a really good pass rusher and a quarterback in the same draft, having already invested a lot in their offensive line. When the Seahawks make a trade for Jamal Adams, the Texans make a trade for like an offensive tackle, Laramie Tunsil. They go and invest in their offensive line. They've built their team to be the kind of team they want to be, and they execute and they're competitive. So, there's some examples in the AFC. I'm just kind of looking through it. I think the Commanders have been quite lucky that, Jayden Daniels has been as good as he is. I think that's the reason why they're 6-2. So I wouldn't read too much into that. But again, the Lions, they've structured their team and they're built very well. The Packers have rebuilt very, very well to be where they are. They've kind of gone after the guys they want to get. There's a lot of examples out there of teams that I think are just doing better with less or the same amount of opportunities as the Seahawks. And they have to. Has he lost his touch? I don't think he's lost his touch. I think he has made some good picks. I think Byron Murphy's a good pick. I think it's the decision to draft Devin Witherspoon and Jackson Smith-Njigba were understandable. I think the decision to draft, I wasn't a Charles Cross fan. He's been okay. I think the decision to draft Ken Walker and Boye Mafe were very good. I think Derek Hall was a solid pick. I don't think they've lost their touch. I think they've just stopped finding those rough diamonds that every team needs to get to become great. And they've done a bad job with the offensive line. And the other thing to it is they've perhaps been a little bit lucky in that they've not been anywhere in position to even consider acquiring a quarterback for the long-term future. And, Geno Smith has probably been one of the few good performers so far this year, but I don't think he is. I don't think he's the future. I bet Richard Sherman did a video last week. Geno Smith is the franchise future of the Seahawks. He isn't. He's the bridge to what's next. And they are going to have to start. They can't just go on year after year after year. I mean, like the next draft will be, I think, 4 since the Russell Wilson trade. Like you can't just keep draft after draft after draft not drafting anybody for that position. I think there's a reasonable chance that they may indeed draft someone next year. Whether that player can start quickly or not, I mean, there's no Josh Allen waiting around the corner, that's for sure.
So I got a question in kind of in that scouting area there for you, Rob. Like the coaching staff was overhauled this past offseason, right? We got rid of Pete. We flushed it all out. There's only a couple carryovers, I think, Nico Thorpe and Carl Scott. Do you think, based on the amount of, like, yes, we've had some good picks, do you think there needs to be consideration of retooling or reevaluating John's scouting staff, especially when it comes to O-line? Because I look at our O-line draft picks, because we've had a lot. We have drafted a bunch of O-linemen. The only one that's ever worked or ever gotten a second contract is Justin Britt. Russell Okun didn't. You know, they traded away Max Unger and they've never been able to stop. But when Justin Britt is, you're like, that's the guy we gave a second contract to. And I'm going, that guy was mediocre at best. And it took 3 position changes for him to figure out maybe he's a serviceable center, because Drew Nowak and Patrick Lewis weren't the answer there at all.
Wow, like, what a blast in the past that is.
I know, right? Good old left-handed snapping over Russell's head in the first game versus the Rams, Drew Nowak. But that's where I wonder, like, is it time to really evaluate who's on John's scouting staff and go, do we have the right pieces there, John, or do you need to reevaluate who you have in your department?
I don't think so, because, you know, with a lot of their draft picks, I think the main problem has been development rather than, I mean, I really liked Damian Lewis. I thought he was a top 50 pick. And then if you remember, Damian Lewis had a terrific rookie season, and everyone thought, there you go, there's the right guard for the next 8 years sorted. And then they moved him to left guard because of Gabe Jackson. And then he spent 2 years trying to work out how to play left guard. And then the Panthers, I'm guessing maybe because of familiarity with the head coach there, ended up spending a lot of money on him. He's been okay. If you look at his PFF grades, he's pretty good. You know, he's had an okay season. So I think with him, they messed him around. Like, I think if they'd have kept him at right guard, I think he may have turned into the kind of player they wanted him to be. And then, you know, at other positions, I really like Abe Lucas. I thought Abe Lucas was a first-round pick or a fringe first-round pick that took him in round 3. I was never a Charles Cross fan, but a lot of people were. Maybe they were right and I was wrong. They took him in the top 10. I spoke to somebody who was an unbelievable talent evaluator like 2 days before the draft, and he said, I'm telling you now, Charles Cross go between pick 7 and 9. And I was like, oh, Seahawks picking at 9. Like, yeah, so look, I don't think it's that. I think maybe they've just been a development thing. But as I'm speaking now, I'm also thinking of all the players that they've not taken.
Right.
That I do not, and by the way, I do not have. I am not for a second saying I have all the answers. I don't. There are offensive linemen that I've liked that have not gone on to be really good pros. But there have been, to be fair, a lot of offensive linemen over the years that we've talked up that have gone on to have very predictable, solid careers. I banged the drum so much for Joel Bitonio. I don't really understand why Seahawks didn't take him, you know, and he's had a fantastic career with Cleveland. You know, Creed Humphrey's the one that everybody always brings up. You could probably name about 5 centers within a 3-year span that ended up drafted in that second round range that have gone on to become very good players, and the Seahawks didn't take any of them. You can run through like a collection of interior linemen. Like the Eagles took Dickerson and Jurgens, liked both a lot, but they end up in Philadelphia, not in Seattle. So I think they've done an okay job scouting players. They've taken some players that I liked. I'm not going to revise history and say I thought Anthony Bradford was a decent pick in round 4. I thought Christian Haynes was a decent pick in round 3. I thought Lucas was a steal in round 3. I thought Damien Lewis was excellent in round 3, but they just haven't developed those players well enough, and they have missed on some others. So I don't think it's scouting. I think that's probably the positive thing. I think they have got the talent in that scouting room to create a good offensive line. I think now, though, they have to be very aggressive to put the pieces together to have another go at developing an offensive line. And while they are developing that offensive line with younger players, I'd like to see them get some proven veteran starters who can just go out there week 1 next season and go, here we are, the new Seahawks offensive line. And there's no growing pains. There's no, oh, is Christian Haynes strong enough to start? It's just, oh no, here's Kevin Zeitler at right guard. Here's Ryan Kelly at center. Oh, look, we've traded for Joe Tooney because the Chiefs need money for Trey Smith and Nick Bolton. So here's your offensive line for the 2025 Seahawks. They're going to hit you in the face. And by the way, we've got a couple of young rookies that we drafted as well who are going to be the future when those older guys move on. That's what I want to see now. And if that doesn't work, at least we can't accuse them of not trying.
So, Rob, just to give you a heads up on the draft compensation you were talking about earlier for Cam Robinson, because we were talking about the Ernest Jones trade and all that. So the Vikings got Cam Robinson and a conditional 2026 7th round that goes away based on play time, but the Jaguars got a conditional 2026 5th that can become a 4th. I didn't mean to ruin your night there, Rob, but he went for a 2026 5th that can turn into a 4th. I think I've crushed Rob's dreams of trades right now. I apologize, Rob.
There's no crushed dreams, just crushed faith. I'm sorry. I found last week really annoying because because for simply raising the question as to, hang on a minute, why did this cost a 4th round pick when none of these other trades cost that much? I got dogs abuse from so many Seahawks fans, like really sort of, like, you don't know what you're doing. I hate you. Like the podcast that I do with Puck, the comments were full of people accusing me of being the most negative person in the world for what I thought was raising a very valid question as to why this trade with Ernest Jones cost way more than all of these other trades. And when I see all these flurry of trades now, I still don't understand it. And part of me wants to go on Twitter right now and just post, I still don't understand why Ernest Jones costs so much more on this. I know what the response will be. It'll be so many people defending the trade, trying to explain, maybe there was somebody else interested in him, and maybe it's because of this. And like you said earlier, it's because they saved Seattle $1 million. I think there's no justification for it other than utter and total desperation on the Seahawks' behalf to go and make this trade happen. They had no business trading away a 4th round pick on a rental for 10 games that they hope will turn into a new contract in the offseason if Ernest Jones even warrants the new contract. He played on Sunday. They still gave up 160 odd rushing yards. So I just, that's the crushing thing for me. It's the knowledge that at the minute when the Seahawks pick up the phone, the other team is trying to hide their excitement when it comes to trades.
Well, Rob, you're just talking about that and almost the same thing. Like, do you think, again, it's more like we're just misevaluating how good we are as a team? Like, Jerome Baker's not cutting it. We're going to bring this guy in and we're going to solve the problem. We are 5-4 last year. Let's go make a splash for Leonard because we got a shot to make a run. And of course they're, and I like Leonard Williams, but again, you got to go pay big bucks for him now because the capital gave up. Just like you said with Ernest, they're now going to have to sign him to, whatever number that is. But I think, sure, maybe the average fan might say, hey, we are first in the division and everyone's struggling. Instead of the guys that are making the hard decisions, really looking in the mirror and saying, how good are we? Yes, we're statistically first early on, but are we a good team to make these moves?
I think they do overestimate how good they are. I think the last 2 years are great evidence of that. They beat the Browns last year because of Jamal Adams heading the football in one of the most fluky interceptions you'll see to win a game where they couldn't move the ball on offense for an entire half. And that one interception gave them the opportunity to win the game when Cleveland really should have closed it out with PJ Walker, who was Seattle's third string quarterback in the preseason, looked terrible, was their quarterback. Because of that win and because the Niners lost that weekend, that's why the Leonard Williams trade happened. They gave up a second-round pick for a rental, and they thought, here we go. We've won. We're first. NFC West. We're going for this. This trade will win us the division and get us into the playoffs. We're here. We've arrived. In a few days later, they got destroyed by the Ravens, like 37-3 or whatever it was. Yeah. And the Niners won, and from there on, the Niners just waltzed to the NFC West, and the Seahawks didn't make the playoffs. And then a year on, same thing. They beat Atlanta. Niners lose to the Chiefs. Make a big trade. It's not as big as the Leonard Williams one. It's not a million miles away. Same kind of thought process.
Yeah.
A few days later, destroyed by the Bills. Niners win a game against the Cowboys. I wouldn't be surprised if the Niners just run away with the NFC West from now. I mean, it really wouldn't surprise me if they did, or the Rams did, or even the flipping Cards. It would not surprise me at all. If the Seahawks lose this weekend, they'll be in last place in the NFC West. Yes, they overestimate how good they are, and they do it every year.
So I got one quick question, Rob, before we get to the Rams matchup, because we want to get your opinions on that. If, say, Seattle goes 0-3 over the next 3 games, so they lose the Rams, lose the Niners, lose the Cardinals, do you think there is a conversation that goes on for the remainder of the season, depending on how the offense looks, where they may turn and say, we want to see what Sam Howell can do with this team and just see what they've got leading into next year's obvious conversations about Geno and a potential extension and whatnot? And I'm not saying I think Sam Howell's the next guy, but do you think there's a point where that may become a conversation in the building?
I think if they get to a point in the season where the playoffs are all either confirmed not happening or all but confirmed, like it's a growing inevitability, I think they will have a look at Sam Howell. I think while ever they're in contention, even for the 7th seed, I don't think they will consider it. But if they, like you say, if they lost all of these games, I don't think they will lose every game. I think they probably will win the odd game to sort of stay somewhat in the mix, which probably won't help. But if they got to the end of the season with, let's say, 2-3 games to go and they were out of it, I think they probably would have a look at Sam Howell. Just to see what they've got, because why not in that point? Like, even if you fully intend to roll with Geno Smith next season, you might as well have a look at what Sam Howell can do.
Yeah, Rob, one last thing for me, and by the way, I love what you just, when you mentioned that old line, like what you could you start picturing, like, man, wouldn't that be cool? Just these guys, there's no question marks, and it might take a little time, but you're rolling it out there, and then you feel good about Ken back there, and whatever receivers you got out there will just change that philosophy. I mean, to me, thinking about that, you're just like, that would be just such a nice change, and just like you said, you take a swing. If it doesn't work, whatever, just do something different, and that's what kind of get you excited. But like you said, you got to have that aggressive offseason, and we'll see what happens. And then you mentioned, you lose against the Rams. We're in last. I mean, the way we're playing, and you look at the other teams, I mean, Rams getting healthy. I hate to say it, but we're looking like the last place team, just the way the Cardinals are sort of, playing for their guy, and the Rams getting healthy, and they got a proven guy in McVay. And I agree, the Niners could just put a few things together, get a guy healthy here and there, and off they go. But real quick, appreciate you hanging out with us for this long. But what's your take? Not looking for a prediction or anything, but what's your take about the upcoming game? And we do have the Rams divisional game. It's to me now, it's tough to call what team you're going to see. I mean, I know you said we lost 4 or 5, and you kind of go in Atlanta and you look good, and then it's polar opposite on Sunday. What's your take? What's your outlook of the game? Are you excited to watch it? I mean, what's your thoughts?
Well, I mean, if Aaron Donald was still in the league, I'd say this was an absolute shoo-in Rams win, but he's not. So I think that will give the Seahawks a chance to have a better day. I do think that this is a team that on its day can produce an Atlanta-style performance.
Right, yeah.
And if they could get a lead, if they could come out playing on the front foot and scoring points on the offense, they will have a chance to win this game against the Rams. I think Sean McVay, as much as, as a division rival, you'd rather this not be the case, is just an unbelievable coach. And when paired with someone of the quality of Matt Stafford, and then with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp back, it's going to be an unbelievable test for this defense. And I can well imagine the Rams just winning the game, maybe even at a canter if they all get firing and the offense can't keep up. I think this is going to be a game where the offense is going to need to throw a punch when every time the Rams do, and they couldn't do that against the Bills or the Niners. Well, they did it against the Lions. So that it needs to be that kind of game, but a bit better. And I don't have the confidence that they're going to do it, but I still think there is a chance that they will have the odd game where low expectations, they turn up and play like they did against Atlanta. And that could easily be against the Rams. I don't think it'll be against the Niners, but I think it could be against the Cardinals. My guess is they will win at least one of the next 3 games, maybe even 2, but I don't see them beating the San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah, in Santa Clara. Yeah, like you said, it's almost a week-to-week thing right now where you're going to get, and like people watching, it's just questioning things and just kind of having that outlook of because we want to see this team successful, and it's just how do we get there? And I think all 3 of us agree we're not let's just give it time belief. It's like, no, what are we doing in that time to get there? And like you mentioned, the big thing, got to have an aggressive offseason to just really do things differently. And that's going to be, we thought this offseason was interesting, which it was. I think the next offseason is going to be even more interesting to kind of see what we do. So, but Rob, we really appreciate you coming on. Love having you on. Why don't you let everybody know where they can find you, your channel, and the blog, everything you got going on.
SeahawksDraftBlog.com. I've written 2 very lengthy articles this week. 1, how to fix the Seahawks, and 2, how to fix the offensive line specifically. Go and check them out. That I don't think there's any other website producing content like that, especially with regards to the draft and the Seahawks and team building and stuff. So I just, if anyone could go and give that a read so that it wasn't a waste of time spending hours putting those articles together, that'd be appreciated. And if on YouTube, obviously I have my own videos and streams. So Rob Staton Football, please subscribe, and then you won't miss any of them.
Yeah, good stuff, guys. Yeah, make sure you go over to Rob's channel, subscribe to all of that. Again, Rob, we really appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll talk again in the future here.
My pleasure, guys. Always good to join you.
Thanks,
awesome.
Rob.
Thanks, Rob. Guys, that was Rob Staton again on the show. We said Rob's one of our favorite guests for a reason. It was honest, and that's what you were going to get with Rob. And, again, it's not being critical of this team. It's just questioning because, Bryce and I come on here at least once. We were here a couple times a week with you guys, and you guys know by now we love this team. And by no means are we bashing this team or nothing. We want to see this team being successful. Like Rob said, his worst fear is to be middling for years and years. And you look at how some other teams have done their thing, and you want to get there. And we're just looking for answers, having Rob on, a lot of questions that fans have, trying to get to those answers, at least get closer to them, man. So, man, again, awesome having Rob on.
Yeah, no, it's awesome having Rob on the show. He gives us a different perspective, and he's going to be blunt and honest. And, we encourage our listeners to be, engageful in the comments and stuff, because it gives us even stuff sometimes to ask our guests when they come on. But in regards to Rob, we really wanted to see where his head's at with this team. He does a lot of work in the draft and with the team building side of things. And he has Curtis Allen as his salary cap guy. So they do a really good job on that side of talking about the Hawks. And, people may not always agree with our opinions, and people may not always agree with Rob's opinions, but that's what makes this fun for us, is we get to have open and honest conversations about a team that we all love and want to see be successful at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the whole thing. So it's again awesome. Rob hung out here for a while. We appreciate it again. So guys, make sure you go down to Rob's channel, Rob Staton on YouTube, and sub to his, because honestly, he's definitely one of my go-to listens. I love listening to his take because he's honest. He's going to be honest. He's going to be he's looking for solutions too. You know, he's a diehard Seahawk fan, and his draft blog is second to none. So make sure you go check that out. So yeah, SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Again, check it out. And guys, make sure you go down and sub to our channel too. Everything helps. And share the video, like the video. Also comment on the video, because like you guys know, man, we love interacting. We jump in there with the comments. We don't just sit back. We love having a conversation. So make sure you fire in those comments. We'd love to hear your reaction to today's pod. So get him in there. Guys, we got Chris Clough coming on later in the week. Awesome guest. We've had him on a few times, friend of the show. You guys are going to love him if you haven't heard him on the show yet. So, yeah, it's going to be a great couple of weeks for us. And let's go get the Rams, man. Let's go win. So that's it for us tonight. Catch you guys in the next one. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.